Are you kidding me? Daniel Whitmore's laugh echoed through the paneled office as the lawyer's voice trailed off. He leaned back in his leather chair, his cufflinks catching the light, and smirked at me across our father's desk. $42 million in real estate, and all you get is Dad's old boat. Guess even losers get consolation prizes. I gripped the armrest of my chair, so hard my knuckles ached. The air smelled of leather, dust, and betrayal. Mother's face stayed frozen, though her hands twisted in her lap. Mr. Caldwell, the lawyer, cleared his throat like he wished he could vanish into his paperwork. To my eldest son, Daniel Whitmore, he had read moments earlier. I leave the entire real estate portfolio, including commercial holdings, rental properties, and development projects, collectively valued at $42 million. The words cut like a sentence. Now his glasses slid lower on his nose as he continued. To my younger son, Jonathan Whitmore, I leave the Sea Haven, my 1986 fishing boat, presently docked at Harborview Marina, slip number 9. Silence pressed down, so heavy I could hear the faint buzzing of the lights overhead. Daniel chuckled again, adjusting his Rolex, the same one Dad had worn to board meetings. Maybe you can fish up dinner, Johnny. God knows you'll need it. My daughter Claire, only 16 but sharper than anyone in that room, shot to her feet. Her voice didn't waver. Grandpa always said value isn't about the price tag. He said it's about what's hidden beneath the surface. Daniel scoffed. Then that boat must mean you get to stay at the bottom, right where you belong. What none of them understood. Not Daniel in his $1,000 suit. Not the lawyer with his 40 years of practice. Not even Mother after 46 years of marriage. Was that my father never left anything to chance. He was a man who scheduled breakfast a week ahead, who kept backup plans for his backup plans, who researched coffee beans like he was negotiating mergers. He didn't toss me a broken-down boat out of neglect. Days later, standing on the deck of the Sea Haven, I felt the sting of humiliation still burning in my chest. I was ready to sell her, let the salt-stained wood and rusted railings become someone else's burden. But as I checked the hull for damage, I found it, a welded container, hidden where no one would think to look. Inside, wrapped in oilskin and sealed against time, were documents, contracts, ledgers, and one letter addressed to me. My father's handwriting was firm, deliberate. Jonathan, I never wanted you to be my shadow. You were never just my son. You were my partner. The empire Daniel clings to is only half the story. The other half is yours to claim, if you're strong enough to look deeper. I sat there, the waves rocking gently against the pier, my hands trembling around the letter. All those years of being dismissed, mocked, overshadowed, it wasn't failure. It was preparation. Daniel thought he won. He thought the gold watch, the towers of glass and steel, the billions in property made him our father's heir. But he never saw what Dad built beneath the surface. And as the sun sank behind the marina, I realized something I would never forget. Sometimes the smallest inheritance carries the largest legacy. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and this is how my father's worthless boat proved I was more than his son. I was his chosen partner. I chose calloused hands over polished cufflinks, job sites over boardrooms, and the smell of wet concrete over the scent of imported leather. Dad called it honest work whenever someone asked about his youngest son, though his tone always sounded like explanation instead of pride. As if Vernon Whitmore, the man who built an empire out of a single duplex, needed to excuse why his boy swung hammers instead of signing deals. Vernon was a legend in our town. In 1976, he bought a rundown duplex at a foreclosure auction for $11,000. Nights and weekends, he worked on it himself while still putting in hours at the lumber yard. By the time I was born a decade later, he owned 30 properties. By the time I left high school, he controlled 200 buildings across 3 states. The Whitmore name was stamped on office towers, retail plazas, and sprawling apartment complexes. Growing up in that house was like watching a play where the lead role had already been cast. My brother Daniel was 4 years older and treated like he was 40 years ahead. His report cards were pinned proudly on the refrigerator door. Mine usually slipped behind grocery lists or dentist reminders. At dinner, Dad would slide a newspaper across the table with Daniel's face staring from the business section. Look at your brother, 26, and managing 10 properties already. That's vision. Meanwhile, I came home with concrete dust caked under my fingernails. While Daniel was polishing his Rolex, I was icing my sore back. He spent evenings celebrating acquisitions at the country club. I spent mine eating takeout on a job site. Still, I wasn't bitter. Not really. I love the work. When you pour a foundation, it holds or it doesn't. There's no spin, no marketing pitch, no accountant to hide the cracks. Just truth, measured in steel and stone. Claire, my 16-year-old daughter, understood this better than anyone. She had been my anchor since the day her mother walked away. Deciding life with a construction worker wasn't the fairy tale she wanted. Claire split her weeks between homes, but the days she spent with me were the only ones that mattered. "Dad, you build things that last," she'd say whenever she caught me staring too long at another article about Daniel. "Uncle Daniel just moves papers around. Anybody can sell something. But you make something that wasn't there before." Even she looked uncertain when we walked into the lawyer's office for the will reading 2 weeks after Dad's funeral. The cancer had taken him faster than any of us expected. 1 month he was closing deals, the next he was too weak to stand. Daniel handled the arrangements, of course, turning the service into what felt like a networking event in a black suit. Mom sat quietly in the corner that day, a tissue crushed in her hand, her black dress making her look smaller than her 67 years. She leaned toward me before things began. "Your father had reasons for everything, Johnny. Even when we couldn't see them, he had his reasons." Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, glasses perched low as he shuffled the papers. He was a careful man, the kind who treated every word like it was evidence in court. Across the room, Daniel sat tall in his tailored suit, fingers drumming against the arm of the chair like he already knew the verdict. And by the window stood Uncle Walter, his weathered face unreadable. He and Dad had built the company together back in the late 70s, two brothers with a borrowed toolbox and nothing but grit. Then, in the early 90s, something happened. No one ever spoke of it. One day Walter was vice president of Whitmore Development. The next, he was gone, running a modest contracting business on the edge of town. He still showed up for Christmas dinners, still mailed birthday cards, but the air between him and Dad always carried an unspoken weight, like a conversation that had been avoided for decades. Caldwell adjusted his tie, looking at us the way a surgeon looks at a patient's chart before delivering the diagnosis. Vernon was very clear in his instructions. He said finally, his voice steady but heavy, like each word carried the weight of a hammer. And with that, the silence in the room sharpened, every person waiting for the blow that would change everything. "There are no provisions for challenge," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice flat as he shuffled the pages. "What I'm about to read is final and binding." The office seemed to shrink with every word. The heavy walls, the mahogany shelves, even the air itself pressed down like expectation turned solid. Daniel leaned forward, his expensive pen already resting in his hand, eyes shining with calculations. He was planning renovations, acquisitions, profits, before the ink even touched the paper. I sat there in my one suit, the same gray jacket I'd worn at graduation, and felt the burn of humiliation climb my throat. I'd been hit by swinging beams, crushed by falling scaffolding, burned through my gloves by quick-set concrete. None of that compared to this. Nothing hurt more than watching $41 million slide across the table to my brother, while I was left with a fishing boat worth maybe $8,000 if someone was both generous and half drunk. Daniel didn't bother hiding his joy. He stood, his chair groaning against the floor, and walked over with mock sympathy plastered across his face. His hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and patronizing. "Hey, Johnny, if you need gas money, just ask. Family helps family." His grin widened, the gold of Dad's old watch glinting. "That boat's probably dead, but maybe you can start a little charter business. I could even invest, give you a loan. You'd finally get to say you're in business too." My skin crawled under his touch. "If there are no questions," Mr. Caldwell said, uncomfortable with the circus the room had become, "we'll move on to the signing." "No questions here," Daniel answered quickly, clicking his Mont Blanc. Dad was crystal clear. He knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, I drove to Harborview Marina, papers folded in my glove box. The security guard at the gate squinted at me, pity mixing with curiosity. "Slip 9, he said, pointing down the dock. "Though, truth be told, your daddy hasn't taken that boat out in years. Just sat in it, every Sunday morning like clockwork, until about a year back. And there she was, the Sea Haven, at the end of the dock like some forgotten relic of a man who built towers, but kept one secret tied to the water. The paint peeled in long curls. Bird droppings spotted the deck like cruel laughter. The vinyl seats were cracked from years of sun, the lines frayed, the engine compartment little more than a museum of rust. Harold, the marina manager, walked up with a steaming cup of coffee, his cap pulled low. He'd seen boats like this come and go, and families too. "Your dad loved this old girl," he said, leaning against a piling. "Came here every week. Never left the dock. Just sat in the cabin for hours, writing, sometimes staring out at the water, like he was keeping something here no one else could touch. I climbed aboard, the deck groaning beneath me." Harold took a sip from his cup. "Your brother was out here yesterday. Took pictures. Said he'd help you list it. Even offered to buy it himself for 10 grand. Said he'd turn it into a planter for one of his plazas." The image of Daniel filling Dad's boat with dirt and flowers to decorate a strip mall turned my stomach. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the ownership papers. The weight of humiliation hadn't lifted. Claire was asleep upstairs, and the silence pressed heavy until the phone rang. "Johnny." Mom's voice was soft but carried steel beneath it. "Don't let bitterness blind you. Your father saw something in you that maybe you've forgotten to see in yourself." "Yeah," I muttered. "He saw someone worth $8,000. You think that boat is the message? It's not. That boat meant everything to him before the money, before the company, before your brother's suits and headlines. He bought it with his first real paycheck from the lumberyard. He used to take you out on it, remember? You'd sit on the deck with your legs dangling, and he'd talk about the future. Said the boat was freedom, possibility, a reminder of what mattered most." Her words sank in, heavier than any load of concrete I'd ever poured. Dad didn't waste choices. He didn't do sentiment without reason. And maybe, just maybe, that boat wasn't a consolation prize at all. It was a message waiting to be discovered. I didn't remember those trips with Dad. Or maybe I buried them, the way I'd buried every other memory from before Daniel became the golden heir to the Whitmore fortune. That night my phone buzzed. Daniel had sent a photo, his polished shoes propped on Dad's desk, a bottle of champagne in his hand. The caption read, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Someone's got to do it. Let me know when you're ready to sell the boat. Offer's still 10 grand. I shut the phone off and went to the garage. Dust-covered boxes of Dad's old photos and papers lined the shelves, and I dug through them like a man desperate for oxygen. Claire found me sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, papers scattered around. She picked up one of the photos, Dad standing on the Sea Haven, holding me as a boy, both of us grinning like we'd found treasure. "You gonna sell it?" she asked. "Maybe. Truck transmission's going. 10 grand would cover it with something left over." She studied the photo a moment longer. "Grandpa never gave anything without a reason. Remember when he gave me that old brass compass for my birthday? Everyone thought it was junk. Turned out it was his father's from World War II. Helped guide a bomber through dozens of missions." He said, "Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest stories." Her words gnawed at me for days. Finally, 3 mornings later, I drove to the marina. Selling the boat without ever taking her out felt wrong, like tossing away a sealed letter. If Dad had held on to her all those years, I owed him at least one last trip. The October air was sharp and clean, the water glittering like glass. Harold, the marina manager, met me at the slip with his coffee in hand. "Funny thing," he said as he checked the engine. "She'll run. Your dad paid me 5 years in advance to keep her maintained. Full service. Engine checks. Hull cleanings. Everything. 5 years." I asked, stunned. He nodded, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Said you'd understand when the time came. And he told me, if you ever talked about selling it, I should tell you to check everything twice before you did. The engine fired up on the first turn, steady as if she'd been waiting for me. I spent hours crawling over that boat, running my hands along the deck, checking every compartment, searching for the piece I was missing. The gear was updated, surprisingly modern. The navigation system had been installed only 2 years earlier. The cabin was spotless, more like a shrine than a fishing boat. That's when I noticed it. One section of mahogany paneling behind the captain's chair. A hairline gap, barely there, like the wood had been touched thousands of times. I pressed. Nothing. I tried sliding it. Still nothing. Then my eyes went to the wheel. The spokes were worn on the port side, as if it had been cranked hard left over and over again, more than any navigation would ever require. I gripped the wheel and twisted it all the way to port. A soft click echoed through the cabin. The panel popped open. My chest tightened as I pulled it aside to reveal a compartment, just big enough for a briefcase. Inside sat a heavy waterproof container, the kind you'd expect Navy officers to guard. It was locked with a combination dial, steel cold under my fingertips. And then I knew. March 18th, my birthday. Not Daniel's. Not my parents' anniversary. Mine. My hands trembled as I spun the numbers. When the final digit fell into place, the lock gave way with a sharp, clean click. The sound seemed to carry through the boat, through the marina, through every year I'd spent living in Daniel's shadow. It was as if Dad himself had whispered in my ear, "This was always meant for you." Inside the case were several manila envelopes, a neat stack of photographs, and a letter written in Vernon Whitmore's unmistakable hand, the same careful script that had signed my school report cards, Christmas notes, and birthday card for 38 years. My throat tightened as I unfolded the letter. The very first line made me sink into the captain's chair, the chair where Dad had spent countless Sunday mornings. "Johnny, if you're reading this, it means you've finally taken the helm." The first envelope I opened held incorporation papers for something called Ironclad Infrastructure Group, LLC, dated 1991. The second was a series of bank statements from an account I'd never heard of, numbers so staggering my vision blurred. Over $40 million sat quietly in those ledgers. The third envelope was thicker, packed with contracts, development agreements, and engineering proposals. As I read through them, a pattern began to emerge, a pattern that made my chest seize. Every major construction project I had ever worked on in the last 15 years was there. The overpass in Columbus, where I'd spent months reinforcing steel. The parking complex in Charlotte, where I had overseen the foundation. The water treatment plant in Savannah, where I'd built my reputation as a problem solver who never cut corners. Ironclad Infrastructure had been a silent partner in every single one. Then I saw the photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of me on job sites, candid shots I never knew existed. Each had notes scribbled in Dad's careful handwriting in the margins. Johnny leading the Columbus crew. Johnny fixing the drainage issue in Charlotte. Johnny training the Savannah team. He had been watching me all along, documenting every step of my work like a man charting the growth of something he had planted years ago. At the bottom of the case sat another envelope. This one was sealed and marked with a single word: truth. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside were adoption papers dated 1986, the year I was born. My biological father's name leapt off the page: Juan Reeves. Uncle Juan, the man who had stood like a ghost in the corner at the will reading, silent while Daniel inherited the visible empire and I was left with a boat. The same man who had walked away from Dad's company decades ago. Everything I thought I knew about my life snapped apart and reassembled in an instant, like puzzle pieces locking into a new picture. Dad's letter explained it all in a steady, methodical voice. Each line was deliberate, like he was building a foundation with words. "Johnny, the empire you watched Daniel inherit was always meant for him. He thrives on recognition, his worth measured in square footage, newspaper mentions, and country club whispers. That's who he is. I made peace with that. But you were like I was before the money complicated everything. You understand that true wealth isn't measured in what people see. It's what you build when no one is watching." The next paragraph stopped me cold. Ironclad Infrastructure is my real legacy. A silent partnership across 6 states. Every project you've poured sweat into, we've had a stake in. You weren't just pouring concrete, son. You were shaping an empire, beam by beam, brick by brick. While Daniel posed for press releases, you were creating the framework that holds half the Southeast together. My eyes burned as I read on. The boat wasn't an insult. It was a test. Would you value something that seemed worthless? Would you honor me enough to take her out one last time? Daniel got what he can show off. You're receiving what truly matters. The unseen foundation that holds everything up. Ironclad generates over $8 million a year in contracts. It's yours now. The paperwork has been filed for years. You've been the sole beneficiary since the day you set foot on a job site. My hands trembled as I pulled the adoption papers closer. At the bottom, beneath my biological father's name, was Vernon Whitmore's bold signature. The same signature etched across every moment of my life. He hadn't just raised me. He had chosen me. He had trusted me with a part of his empire no one else even knew existed. And for the first time in my life, I understood what he had been building all along. Tucked behind the adoption papers was another letter, written in a rougher hand, the kind of script that belonged to a man who'd spent his life working rather than sitting in offices. The signature at the bottom read Vernon Reeves. My mother's name was on the side too, confirming what I was about to read wasn't just a story, it was my history. Johnny, your mother and I were young and foolish. I was 22, she was 19, and Vernon had already been her husband for 2 years. That summer he was laid up in the hospital with appendicitis. She and I crossed a line we never should have, and it couldn't be undone. When you were conceived, Vernon had already been told he couldn't have children. Your mother wanted to run, leave everything. But Vernon did something I'll never forget. He said he'd raise you as his own. He told us, every legacy needs an heir, and blood doesn't make a family, commitment does. Signing those papers was the hardest and best decision of my life. Vernon loved you in a way I never could. He saw in you what he saw in himself, someone who creates real things, not just paper profits. The infrastructure company was his way of protecting your future, keeping you out of Daniel's jealousy and the Whitmore spotlight. Daniel inherited the worst parts of the Reeves pride, the need to be seen, to prove himself superior. Vernon knew it and kept you where you belonged, away from the show, close to the substance. You weren't just his son. You were his successor in the things that truly mattered. I sat in stunned silence. My first instinct was to call Mom. My voice cracked like I was 13 again when she answered. You knew. We all did, Johnny, she said softly, as if she'd been rehearsing this conversation for decades. From the moment you were born, Vernon said you were his son, not by chance but by choice. The day he held you in that hospital room, he told me nothing else mattered. Biology was just a footnote. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Because your father wanted you to live without the burden of that truth. He wanted you to become the man you were meant to be, not the man you thought you had to be. Every Sunday, when he went down to that boat, he wasn't escaping. He was writing in his journal about you, your work, your character, the pride he felt in the man you were becoming. He saved every project report that mentioned your name, every safety award, every commendation. Daniel never noticed, never cared. He only saw what he wanted: money, properties, recognition. But you, Johnny, you had what mattered most. Your father's faith, his love. I stare at the last document in the case. A legal transfer of ownership for ironclad infrastructure, dated just 1 week before Dad died, officially naming me the sole owner. On top of it was a sticky note in his shaky handwriting, his final words to me. The boat is yours, son. She may not look like much, but she carries the truth. Care for what matters. Let Daniel have the spotlight. You keep the foundation strong. That's what real builders do. I kept the boat, not out of necessity, but because it was the clearest symbol of what Dad had tried to teach me all along. I restored her with my own hands. 3 months of sanding, repairing, and replacing every bolt, board, and length of rope. Harold pitched in whenever he could, telling stories of Dad's quiet Sundays. Your father would sit right there, Harold said one afternoon as we wired in a new navigation system. Sometimes I bring him coffee. He'd be writing in that leather journal of his, staring at the horizon like he was seeing something none of us could. Now I think I know he was seeing you. When the Sea Dreams was finally finished, painted deep navy with gold trim, just like in the old photos, Harold just stood back and nodded. Your dad will be proud. He once told me real wealth isn't in what people brag about. It's in what you build quietly with your own two hands. I thought he was talking about the boat. But no, he was talking about you. The Sea Dreams gleamed under the afternoon sun. More than a boat, more than an inheritance. She was proof that love, sacrifice, and faith carried more weight than $41 million worth of real estate ever could. I never told Daniel about ironclad infrastructure. Let him keep the spotlight, the glossy features in the business section, the photographs of him cutting ribbons at shopping centers. Every month when he boasts about another Whitmore acquisition at family dinners, I sit back and smile quietly, knowing the garage beneath it belongs to Ironclad. The water and power lines running to it, mine. The skeleton his empire leans on was built by my hands, earning revenue he doesn't even know exists. Uncle Juan and I meet for coffee every Sunday at the same diner off Route 47, where crews in work boots gather before sunrise. He stirs his cup and says it every week, like a benediction. Vernon raised you right. Then he looks me dead in the eye, reminding me that I could have exposed Daniel. Could have crushed him with the truth the way he once tried to crush me at that reading. But you didn't, Juan says. That's Vernon in you, not me. I'd have rubbed his nose in it. Dad taught me better. I answer, circling my spoon through the black coffee the way Vernon used to. A foundation doesn't ask for applause. It just holds. Claire comes out with me on the boat some weekends, usually at dawn when the water lies flat like glass. Last Saturday, she brought her boyfriend Timothy along, a nervous kid from the hardware store. We were cleaning the deck when Daniel roared into the marina in his new Ferrari, sunglasses gleaming, voice booming. He spent 20 minutes bragging about overseas deals, hedge fund strategies, and how Whitmore meant success in every circle that mattered. Timothy smiled politely, but kept sneaking glances at me. Finally he asked, "Mr. Whitmore, what do you do?" Before I could answer, Claire's voice cut through, calm and steady. My dad builds things that last. Everything else is just noise. That night, long after the marina lights went dark, I was sorting through the navigation desk on Sea Haven when I found another envelope wedged behind the GPS manual. Dad's handwriting filled the page, shaky but firm, dated only a week before he died. Johnny, success isn't measured by what you inherit. It's measured by what you see when others see nothing. The boat was never about the boat. It was about trust. I trusted you to look closer, to value what everyone else overlooks, to protect what's real. You were never my second son. You were my anchor. The real estate empire will make Daniel rich. Ironclad will make you wealthy. But this boat makes you my true heir. Because you understood its worth when everyone else called it worthless. That's the difference between money and meaning. Daniel got the fortune. You got the future. I carry that letter folded in my wallet now, tucked beside an old photo of Dad holding me at age 5. We're both wearing oversized captain's hats, grinning like fools. When Daniel calls to gloat about his latest acquisition, I set the phone on speaker and take the Sea Haven out into the bay. His voice fades under the crash of the waves, and I think about Vernon, about Juan, about a choice that mattered more than blood, about a love that built me stronger than any skyscraper. Daniel Whitmore inherited $41 million worth of towers and tenants that everyone can see. Vernon Whitmore left me an $8,000 fishing boat with peeling paint, a vessel that carried a $43 million secret. But beyond that, hidden in those weathered planks was proof of something Daniel will never touch. I wasn't just Vernon's son. I was his partner, his legacy, his chosen foundation. And that, I've come to realize, is worth more than every building Daniel's name is etched upon.